Chapter 1. The crossing the forest had no name on any map Alina could find, which should have been her first warning. She stood at its edge as twilight bled across the sky, her borrowed coat doing little against the October wind. Behind her lay the village of Thornhaven 3, days of suspicious stares, locked doors, and whispers that followed her through narrow streets. Ahead, the trees rose like cathedral columns, their branches woven so thick that darkness pooled beneath them, even in daylight. The innkeeper's wife had been clear. No one entered the Vale Wood after sunset. Those who did were either fools or had nothing left to lose. Alina supposed she qualified as both. Her hands trembled as she checked the contents of her satchel, a water flask, half a loaf of bread, the letters that had destroyed her life, still crisped with broken seals. She'd burned everything else, her teaching credentials, her references, the carefully constructed respectability that had taken her years to build, all of it reduced to ash the moment her former employer's son decided her rejection was a personal insult worth avenging with lies. Now she was 26, disgraced, and unemployed, with exactly 7 coins to her name, and nowhere to go. The forest, at least, couldn't judge her. Alina stepped between the trees. The temperature dropped immediately. The sounds of the village, distant voices, the clatter of evening meals being prepared cut off as if severed by a blade. Here there was only the whisper of wind through branches and the crunch of frost-brittle leaves beneath her boots. She walked for an hour, maybe 2. Time felt strange under the canopy, elastic and unreliable. The path she'd been following, little more than a game trail, forked and forked again. She chose directions at random, driven by nothing but the need to put distance between herself and the ruin she'd left behind. The moon rose, full and cold. That's when she heard the screaming. Alina froze. The sound came from somewhere ahead, and to the left a woman's voice, raw with terror, cutting through the still air. Every instinct screamed at her to run the other direction. She was alone, unarmed, helpless, but she'd been helpless before. She'd been the one screaming, in a different way, when powerful men had twisted her words and destroyed her name. No one had come. Her feet moved before her mind could argue. She crashed through underbrush, branches tearing at her coat and hair. The screaming grew louder, then abruptly stopped. Alina stumbled into a clearing and immediately wished she hadn't. 5 figures surrounded a young woman who lay crumpled on the ground. The figures moved with an unnatural fluidity, their forms too pale, too sharp in the moonlight. One of them, a woman in a gown that might have been beautiful 2 centuries ago, held the girl by the throat, her head tilted at an angle that suggested curiosity rather than mercy. "Please," the girl on the ground sobbed. "Please, I didn't know, I didn't mean to cause ignorance," the pale woman said, her voice like frost crackling. "Is not innocence." Alina's rational mind catalogued impossible details. The woman's fingers were too long, her eyes caught the moonlight and reflected it back, red as garnets. When she smiled, her teeth were very white and very sharp. The girl on the ground couldn't have been more than 16. "Stop." Alina's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Let her go." 5 heads turned in perfect unison. The woman in the ancient gown released the girl, who scrambled backward with a choked cry. "How fascinating," she said, studying Alina with those terrible red eyes. "Another mortal, and this one walks willingly into our territory." She inhaled deeply. "You smell of desperation and rage. Delicious. I don't care about your territory." Alina forced herself to meet that inhuman gaze. "She's leaving. I'm taking her with me." One of the men laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You're taking nothing, little mortal. This is House Corvain land. Your kind may not pass without permission, and permission was not granted. Then grant it now." "Brave," another voice observed from the shadows at the clearing's edge. "Stupid, but brave." The speaker stepped into the moonlight, and Alina's breath caught. He was taller than the others, dressed in black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Where the woman's beauty was sharp and predatory, his was cold and absolute, the kind of face that belonged on ancient coins or in nightmares. Dark hair fell to his shoulders. His eyes, when they fixed on Alina, were not red but silver gray, old as winter. The other 5 immediately drew back. "Lord Theron," the woman said, and for the first time, Alina heard something like fear in her voice. "We were simply enforcing you were hunting children in my forest." His voice was quiet, controlled, and somehow more frightening than any scream. "House Corvain may patrol the northern reaches, but they do not hold dominion here." The girl violated. "She's 16 and lost." He moved between them and the cowering girl with economical grace. Go back to Corvain, and tell your mistress that the veil remains neutral ground. If she has complaints, she may bring them to the night court. The five exchanged glances. Then, as one, they simply dissolved. Not into mist that would have been too theatrical. They simply were there, and then they weren't. As if reality had briefly forgotten them. Elena's knees threatened to give out. She locked them, and forced herself to stay upright. The man Lord Theron turned his attention to the girl. Go home, he said, not unkindly. Stay away from the forest after dark. If you violate these boundaries again, I won't intervene. The girl fled without a word, which left Elena alone in a moonlit clearing with something that was definitely not human. You, he said, those winter-gray eyes settling on her, should not be here. I had nowhere else to go. Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. You're running? It wasn't a question. Elena lifted her chin. Does it matter? It might. He studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. The Vale Wood is a dangerous place for mortals, especially those who attract attention. I saw what they were going to do to that girl. Yes. A pause. And you interfered anyway, because no one had interfered for her, because she was tired of being helpless, because sometimes doing the right thing was all you had left, because she was afraid. Elena said simply. Lord Theron was quiet for a long moment. Then, come with me. I don't. You have two choices. Follow me to shelter, or remain here until House Corvain circles back for easier prey. His expression didn't change. They will. You disrupted their hunt. They don't forgive that. Elena looked at the dark forest around them, then at the stranger with silver eyes who had just dispatched 5 monsters with nothing but words. She followed. Chapter 2. The Threshold. The man arose from the forest like a monument to forgotten grandeur. Elena followed Lord Theron through Roteran gates that opened at his approach without touch, down a path lined with stone statues whose eyes seemed to track their movement. The building itself was 3 stories of grey stone and Gothic arches. Windows dark except for a single light burning in what might have been a library. It should have felt abandoned. Instead, it felt watched. You live here alone? Elena asked, her voice small against the weight of silence. Yes, that seems lonely. He glanced back at her, and for a moment something almost like amusement touched his features. Loneliness requires the expectation of company. I expect nothing. The front door swung open before them. Inside, candlelight flickered to life in sconces along the walls. No servants, no visible mechanism, just flame answering his presence. Elena's rational mind, already strained past breaking, filed this away with everything else impossible she'd witnessed tonight. The entrance hall was beautiful in the way. Ruins were beautiful, grand bones, showing through decay, marble floors, a sweeping staircase, portraits on the walls with eyes that had gone dark with age, everything clean but untouched, preserved rather than lived in. Lord Theron moved through it like a ghost haunting his own home. You're bleeding, he said without turning around. Elena looked down. Her hands were scratched from branches. Nothing serious, but blood had beaded along several cuts. It's minor. Nevertheless, he gestured to a doorway on the left. The sitting room. There's water and clean cloth. Attend to it. It was an order, gently spoken but absolute. Elena found herself obeying. The sitting room was smaller than she'd expected, almost intimate. A fireplace held fresh logs that ignited as she entered. 2 chairs faced each other across a low table. Bookshelves lined one wall, their spines showing titles in languages she didn't recognize. She found the water basin and cloth where he'd indicated, set into an alcove that might once have been used for formal tea service. As she cleaned her scratches, she caught her reflection in a tarnished mirror. She looked hair tangled with leaves, coat torn, eyes too bright with adrenaline and exhaustion. The respectable schoolteacher was gone entirely. What remained was something raw, less certain, better. Lord Theron said from the doorway. Elena turned. He'd removed his coat, revealing a simple white shirt that somehow made him look more rather than less dangerous. In the firelight, his features were softer but no less beautiful, the kind of beauty that made you forget to breathe. What are you? The question escaped before she could stop it. You know what I am. He moved to one of the chairs and settled into it with inhuman grace. You saw House Corvain. You saw them defer to me. Your mind is simply reluctant to name it. Vampire. The word felt ridiculous in her mouth, something from children's stories, and Penny. You're a vampire. Yes. No denial. No explanation. Just confirmation, as casual as discussing the weather. Elena's legs finally gave out. She sank into the opposite chair, gripping its arms to keep her hands from shaking. This isn't possible. And yet, he tilted his head, studying her with that unnerving intensity. You're not screaming, not fleeing. Most mortals, when confronted with proof, choose hysteria or denial. You're choosing neither. I think I'm in shock. Perhaps pause, or perhaps you've already survived one world ending. What's one more impossibility? The observation struck too close. Elena looked away, focusing on the fire. How did you know I was running? Your clothes are quality but worn. Your hands show evidence of working stains, calluses from penholding. An educated woman, then, but one who's lost her position recently enough that poverty hasn't yet destroyed the evidence of better circumstances. His voice remained neutral, clinical. You carry nothing valuable except letters you keep checking to ensure they're still there, which suggests they're either very important or very damaging. And you walked into the Vale Wood at twilight with nowhere else to go. The story writes itself. Elena's throat tightened. He'd dissected her life in seconds, laid her bare with nothing but observation. I was a governess, she heard herself say, and then I wasn't. The son of my employer. He made advances. I refused. He told his father I'd attempted to seduce him. The words came easier than they should have, freed perhaps by exhaustion, or the surreal unreality of confessing to a vampire in a candlelit manner. They dismissed me without references, started rumors, sent letters to other families warning them against hiring me. I couldn't find work, couldn't afford my lodgings, so I ran, and came here. I didn't know where here was, I just knew I couldn't stay there. Lord Theron was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried something that might have been anger, tightly controlled. Your kind are remarkably efficient at destroying each other. We hunt for survival. You hunt for sport. Not all of us. No, he agreed. Not all, but enough. He stood, moving to the fireplace. You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow, when it's safe, I'll escort you to the southern road. There's a city 3 days' travel from here, large enough for anonymity. You might find work there. It was more than she'd had an hour ago, more than she'd dared hope for. Why are you helping me? Elena asked. He didn't answer immediately. The firelight cast shadows across his face, making him look ancient one moment, achingly lonely the next. Because you stepped in front of House Corvain for a stranger, he finally said. Because you're running from injustice, rather than consequence. Because, he trailed off, then shook his head. It doesn't matter. You'll be gone tomorrow. But something in his voice suggested he didn't quite believe that Elena should have been terrified, should have been planning escape routes, watching for threats, keeping her distance from the predator who'd offered her shelter. Instead, she found herself watching the way firelight caught in his silver eyes and wondering, what could make an immortal creature sound so utterly, profoundly alone? Lord Theron, she said carefully, thank you. He turned to look at her, and for just a moment, his expression was completely unguarded surprise, and something else. Something that looked almost like pain. Just Theron, he said quietly. No one's called me Lord in a very long time. The admission felt like a gift, small but significant. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling windows. Somewhere in the forest, something howled, not a wolf, but close enough to the sound that Elena's pulse quickened. Theron's expression shuddered, closed again. Sleep, he commanded. I'll show you to a room. You're safe here. And where will you be? A slight smile, sharp as broken glass. Somewhere you won't have to watch me not sleeping, not eating, not breathing like your kind do. I'm aware my existence is unsettling. He was right, but as Elena followed him up the sweeping staircase to a bedroom that looked like it had been waiting decades for a guest, she realized that unsettling wasn't quite the word for what she felt. Curious, perhaps, or, worse, intrigued. Chapter 3. The morning after Lena woke to silence. So complete it felt like physical pressure. She lay still for several moments, disoriented by the canopied bed, the heavy curtains, the faint scent of lavender and old wood. Then memory returned in a rush. The forest, the creatures with red eyes, Theron's silver gaze cutting through darkness, vampires, real vampires. She should have convinced herself it was a dream. Instead, she threw back the covers and discovered someone had left fresh clothes folded on a chair, a simple dress in deep gray, old-fashioned but well-made, along with stockings and sturdy boots that looked about her size. The alternative was her torn, mud-stained traveling clothes. Elena changed quickly, trying not to think about how Theron had known her measurements, or where he'd obtained women's clothing in a house he claimed to occupy alone. The hallway outside her room stretched in both directions, lined with closed doors and more of those unsettling portraits. Morning light filtered through tall windows, revealing dust motes floating in golden shafts. Everything looked different in daylight, less menacing, more melancholy. A beautiful house slowly forgetting how to be lived in. She found Theron in the library. He sat in a leather chair near the window, a book open in his lap, perfectly still. For a moment, Alina thought he might be a statue, some elaborate sculpture. Then he turned a page with careful precision, and she noticed what she'd missed in the darkness. He cast no shadow. The sunlight fell directly on him, brilliant and warm, and where it should have created darkness behind him, there was nothing, just light passing through the space he occupied as if he were only partially present in the world. "You're staring?" he said without looking up. Alina flushed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean, it's natural. Most mortals find us unsettling in daylight." He closed the book and finally met her eyes. "We don't sparkle or burn. Before you ask, those are fairy tales. But we don't quite exist the way living things do. The sun recognizes the difference. But you can be in sunlight. I'm old enough that daylight merely weakens me rather than destroys me. Younger vampires must sleep through it or suffer greatly." He stood, setting the book aside. "There's food in the kitchen. Not for me, obviously, but the house maintains basic provisions for guests you don't have. Hope," he said simply, "is a difficult habit to break." The kitchen was surprisingly modern compared to the rest of the house, or at least, modern by the standards of 50 years ago. Alina found bread, cheese, apples that somehow hadn't spoiled, and tea that steeped into something rich and comforting. She ate standing at the counter, aware of Theron, watching from the doorway, with that unnervingly still focus. "You don't have to stay," she said, between bites. "I'm fine. I'm ensuring you don't steal the silver." Alina looked up sharply, caught his slight smile, and realized he was joking. The surprise of it made her laugh, a short, startled sound that seemed to surprise them both. "Does Silva actually know?" "Another fairy tale." He moved into the room, maintaining careful distance. "We're difficult to kill, but not impossible. Stake through the heart works, but so does decapitation, burning, or sufficient blood loss. We're not magical, just persistent." "What about crosses? Holy water?" "Entirely ineffective. We're not demons." Missy paused. "I've offered you shelter and we've discussed the nature of my existence, yet I don't know your name." Alina Blackwood." "Alina," he said it carefully, as if testing how it felt. "You slept well." "Surprisingly, yes." She poured tea, offered him a cup from habit, then caught herself. "Sorry, I keep it." "I appreciate the gesture." His expression softened slightly. "You're handling this remarkably well. Most mortals would be demanding explanations or trying to flee. I suppose I've learned that the world is stranger and crueler than I was taught to believe." Alina wrapped her hands around the warm cup. Finding out vampires exist is almost less surprising than discovering how quickly respected men will destroy a woman's life over wounded pride. Something dark flickered across Theron's face. "The injustice you fled. Tell me about him." "Why?" "Because I'm curious how mortals justify such cruelty to their own kind." There was an edge to his voice that made Alina study him more carefully. In daylight, she could see details she'd missed. The precise cut of his features, the way he held himself with military straightness, the faint scars along his knuckles that suggested violence long past. "His name was Marcus Ashford," she said slowly. 22 years old, wealthy, accustomed to having whatever he wanted. When I refused his advances, he made sure I'd never work in respectable society again. The letters I carry are from families canceling my employment inquiries. Each one references moral unsuitability based on his accusations. You kept them. As evidence. As a reminder. She met his eyes. So I wouldn't forget what truth means versus what power can make people believe. Theron was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I could kill him for you." Elena's teacup froze halfway to her lips. "What?" "It would be simple. I could travel to wherever he lives, ensure he faces consequences for his actions. No one would suspect vampire involvement." His tone was casual, discussing murder, the way others might discuss weather. "Consider it payment for shelter. I don't want him dead." "No." Theron tilted his head. "What do you want?" The question hung between them. Alina realized she didn't have an answer. Justice seemed impossible. Revenge felt hollow. Going back to who she'd been before wasn't an option. "I want," she said slowly, "to not be afraid anymore. To build something new that no one can take away." An admirable goal. difficult to achieve. Is that why you're alone here? Because you've given up on building anything? The words came out sharper than intended. Alina braced for anger, but Theron merely looked at her with something like approval. Perceptive, he murmured. Yes, Miss Blackwood, I've lived too long, lost too much, and found that solitude hurts less than connection inevitably does. He turned toward the window. Which is why you should leave today, as planned, before either of us makes the mistake of thinking this arrangement could be anything but temporary. But he didn't move to escort her out, and Alina didn't ask to leave. Outside, clouds gathered, the light dimmed, and Theron's shadow finally appeared, faint but present, as if the world had decided to acknowledge him after all. Chapter 4. The unraveling. Lena didn't leave that day. She told herself it was because rain began falling in sheets by mid-morning, turning the forest paths treacherous. That was true enough, but it wasn't the whole truth, and she suspected Theron knew it. He'd retreated to the library after their conversation, leaving her to explore the manor on her own. She wandered through rooms that felt like exhibits in a museum parlors, with furniture under cloth covers, a music room with a pianoforte that hadn't been tuned in decades, a conservatory where dead plants still clung to their trellises like fossils. Each room told a story of life interrupted, of people who'd once filled these spaces with sound and warmth. Now, absent so long, the house itself seemed to be forgetting them. She found Theron again near dusk, standing before a portrait in the main hallway. It showed a woman in her 30s, dark-haired and beautiful, wearing the fashion of perhaps 70 years ago. Her smile was slight but genuine, and her eyes, painted with remarkable skill, seemed to follow the viewer with knowing amusement. Your wife? Alina asked, softly. My sister. Theron's voice was distant. Catherine? She died in 1801. Alina did the arithmetic in her head and felt her breath catch. How old are you? I was born in 1756, made vampire in 1779, during the American Revolution, which makes me, he paused, calculating, 247 years old. Give or take. The number should have been incomprehensible. Instead, Alina found herself studying the portrait again, seeing past the formal pose to the person Catherine must have been. She's smiling at you, Alina observed. Whoever painted this caught her looking at someone she loved. Theron's jaw tightened. The artist was skilled, and yes, Catherine had little patience for formal portraits. She made him repaint it 3 times, until he captured something real. What happened to her? Cholera. I was awaiting with house politics in London. By the time I returned, she'd been dead 2 weeks. His hand rose, as if to touch the portrait, then dropped. She was had looked 23 for 22 years by then. She'd aged while I remained frozen. The pain in his voice was ancient but unhealed. Alina felt it resonate with her own loss, smaller perhaps, but no less real. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be. It was the natural order. She lived. I simply continue. He turned away from the portrait. You should know what you're sheltering with, Miss Blackwood. I'm not some romantic figure from novels. I've killed, fed on humans, sometimes unwillingly given. I've made choices in my long existence that would horrify you. Have you killed recently? The question seemed to surprise him. No, not in nearly a century. I feed from animals now, or from willing donors when I must go to the city. House Corvin calls me soft for it. Weak, but you sent them running last night. Because I'm old. Age brings power among our kind, strength, speed, certain abilities others lack. They fear me, despite my restraint, not because of it. He met her eyes. But that restraint is a choice, Alina. I could drain you before you drew breath to scream. Every moment you stand near me, you're trusting that I'll continue choosing control over instinct. He was trying to frighten her, trying to drive her away with honesty where kindness had failed. Alina stepped closer instead of back. You've had 3 opportunities to hurt me, she said. In the forest, when I was alone and vulnerable. In the night, while I slept unguarded in your house. This morning, when we were alone in the kitchen. You've done nothing but offer shelter and truth. Truth can be its own cruelty, perhaps, but I've had enough of pretty lies. She held his gaze, refusing to look away. Why are you really trying to make me leave? For a long moment, Theron said nothing. Then, because you make me remember what it was like to care about someone's well-being beyond simple survival, and I can't afford to remember that. The admission fell between them like a stone into still water, ripples spreading outward into silence. Why not? Alina asked quietly. Because the crash came from upstairs, glass shattering, followed by a sound like laughter made of knives. Theron moved faster than Elena's eyes could track. Suddenly between her and the staircase, "Stay behind me, what House Corvain?" His voice had gone cold, deadly. "They've found you." Footsteps descended the stairs. 3 pairs, moving with that same unnatural fluidity Alina had witnessed in the forest. The woman in the ancient gown appeared first, flanked by 2 male vampires Alina didn't recognize. "Lord Theron," the woman purred. "How domestic, playing house with mortal pets now. You violate, guest right, Margot." "Leave my home, guest." Margot laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "She's not your guest. She's prey who escaped justice. We tracked her here, her blood called to us from the forest floor where she bled. You know the law. Once hunt is declared, the prey belongs to the house that marked them." Elena scratches the blood she'd cleaned in the sitting room. Theron's posture shifted, coiling like a spring. "Alina is under my protection. Hunt law doesn't apply on neutral ground. Your neutral ground is a fiction you maintain through age and reputation. But Mistress Corvain grows tired of your interference." Margot's red eyes fixed on Alina. "The girl from last night was one thing, but this woman saw us, knows what we are. She cannot be allowed to leave. She knows nothing that threatens you. She knows enough, and we're hungry." Margot smiled, showing those terrible sharp teeth. "You can't protect her forever, old one. Eventually, you'll sleep. Eventually, you'll weaken, and we're very, very patient." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Theron's hand found Elena's wrist, his touch cold but steady. "Then, you'll have to go through me first." "Careful, Lord Theron." One of the male vampires spoke, his voice careful. "Mistress Corvain would regret losing you to a foolish gesture over mortal life, but she accept your death if you force the issue. Let her try." The words were soft, absolute. Margot studied them both, then smiled slowly. 3 days, she said. "We'll give you 3 days to reconsider. Send the girl away, or face House Corvain in formal challenge. Those are your options." Then they were gone, dissolving into shadow and air, leaving only the scent of old blood and older malice. Elena's legs finally gave out. Theron caught her before she fell, his arms unexpectedly gentle. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I've brought war to your door." "No," Theron said quietly, something fierce and almost exultant in his voice. "You've given me a reason to fight one." Chapter 5, Blood and Boundaries. The library became their war room. Theron moved through it with renewed purpose, pulling leather-bound volumes from shelves, spreading maps across the reading table. Elena watched him work, still shaken from the encounter, trying to understand what had just shifted between them. "House Corvain," Theron said, opening a book filled with elegant handwriting, "is one of 7 vampire houses that maintain power in this region. Each house controls territory, enforces laws among our kind, and operates under protocols established centuries ago." He traced a finger across a hand-drawn map. "Corvain holds the northern forests. House Blackthorn controls the eastern cities. House Ravencroft claims the southern ports, and you, I claim nothing. I'm what we call unhoused, no allegiance, no territory, no political power. The Vale would exist as neutral ground because I'm too old and too dangerous for the houses to challenge directly without cause." His jaw tightened. "Until now." Elena moved to the table, studying the map. "Why would they risk challenging you over me? I'm nobody. You're a witness, a mortal who saw vampires clearly, who could spread word of our existence." Theron's finger moved to a notation on the map, a village marked in red. 3 months ago, a farmer in Millbrook started telling stories about night creatures hunting livestock. House Corvain silenced him and his entire family. They don't take chances. The casual horror of it made Elena's stomach turn. "They killed them all." "Yes, and they'll kill you if given the chance, then kill me for protecting you." House politics is brutal, Elena. Mercy is seen as weakness, and weakness invites conquest. "Then, I'll leave. Tonight, I'll go far enough that they'll hunt you." Theron closed the book with controlled force. Margot wasn't bluffing. "They've tasted your blood now, marked you as prey. You could run to the other side of the world, and they'd eventually find you. So what do I do?" Theron was quiet for a long moment, his silver eyes distant. "There are 3 options. First, I could turn you, make you vampire. You'd be under my protection as progeny, and House Corvain couldn't touch you without declaring war on me personally." Elena's hand went instinctively to her throat. "And the second option, I fight them, formally challenge House Corvain, invoke the Night Court's arbitration. If I win, they're bound by law to leave you alone." He met her eyes. "The survival rate for such challenges is approximately 30%. Those aren't good odds." "No. but I'm old enough that my odds are better than most. He paused. The third option is that you stay here, under my protection, indefinitely. I ward the house against intrusion. We survive the 3 days, and hope Corvain eventually loses interest. They won't, will they? No, they'll wait months if necessary. Years. They have time. Theron's expression was bleak. Margot has wanted an excuse to challenge my neutrality for decades. You've simply given her the opening she's been waiting for. Alina sank into one of the library chairs, her mind racing. 3 options, all terrible. Become a monster, watch Theron die for her, or live as a prisoner in this beautiful, lonely house. What would you do? She asked. If you were me, I would run and take my chances. His answer was immediate. I would choose freedom over safety, mortality over eternity, even knowing the risks. But you became vampire. I didn't choose it. The words came out sharp. I was dying on a battlefield, gut-shot and bleeding out. Another vampire, one who saw military potential in me, offered me survival. I was 23 and terrified of death. I said yes before understanding what I was accepting. Do you regret it? Theron looked at her for a long moment. Every day for the first 50 years. Then the pain became normal. Then it became numbness. Now, he trailed off. Now I don't know what I feel anymore. Except when you're here, asking questions no one's asked me in a century, making me remember what it was like to be human. The confession hung between them, raw and unexpected. Elena stood, moving closer. Teach me. Teach you what? How to defend myself. How your world works. The rules. The politics. What to watch for. Her voice steadied with decision. I won't become vampire, and I won't run. But I also won't be helpless prey waiting to be slaughtered. If I'm staying, I want to understand what I'm facing. Theron studied her, something like admiration flickering across his features. You realize this means trusting me, completely. I'd have to teach you our weaknesses as well as our strengths. And do you trust me? I'm beginning to, he said quietly. Against all wisdom and experience, yes. Then teach me. We have 3 days before they return. Use them. A slow smile crossed Theron's face, the first genuine smile Alina had seen from him. It transformed him, made him look less like an ancient predator, and more like the young man he'd been before death claimed him. Very well, he said. Lesson 1. Vampire senses. We see better in darkness than light. Hear heartbeats from 50 paces. Smell blood through walls. Which means every moment you're near me, I'm aware of your pulse, your breathing. The chemical changes in your scent when you're afraid or angry or he paused. Other emotions, Alina flushed. You can smell emotions, adrenaline, cortisol, pheromones, your body betrays you constantly. He moved around the table toward her, demonstrating the predatory grace that came so naturally. Right now, your heart rate has increased. You're nervous but not frightened, curious despite the danger. Your blood is singing and I can hear every note. He stopped just within arm's reach. Close enough that Alina could see the inhuman stillness of his chest, no breathing, no unconscious movement, just absolute, perfect control. Lesson 2, Theron continued, his voice dropping lower. Vampire feeding requires 3 things: proximity, permission, and exchange. We cannot compel obedience. That's fairy tale nonsense. But we can make feeding pleasurable for the donor. It's a survival adaptation, evolved to ensure cooperation. Have you ever, Elena's voice caught, fed from someone without permission? Yes, when I was young and the hunger controlled me rather than the other way around. His expression darkened. I'm not proud of those nights, but I won't lie about them either. And now I ask, always. His eyes met hers, intense and entirely focused. Which is why you're safe here, Alina. Not because I lack hunger, but because I've learned that some things are worth more than feeding it. Chapter 6. The revelation. They worked through the night. Theron taught with the precision of someone who'd spent centuries observing, analyzing, surviving. He showed Alina the sigils carved into the manor's doorframes, ancient, protective wards that prevented uninvited vampires from entering. He explained the hierarchy of houses, the protocols of the Night Court, the blood oaths that bound vampire society together. House law operates on 3 principles, he said, sketching diagrams on parchment: territory, lineage, and debt. Every vampire belongs to a house, or chooses to be unhoused like me. Territory disputes are settled through challenge or court arbitration. And debts, he paused. Blood debts are eternal. Save a vampire's life, and they owe you. Take a vampire's progeny, and their entire house becomes your enemy. Alina absorbed it all, asking questions that made Theron stop and reconsider explanations he'd taken for granted. She had a quick mind, he'd discovered, sharp and practical, cutting through centuries of vampire pretension to find the underlying logic. So House Corvain wants to kill me to prevent exposure, Alina summarized. But they're also using me as an excuse to challenge your neutrality. They want your territory. Yes, the Valewood is strategically valuable. It borders 3 house territories and provides access to several mortal settlements. If Corvin controls it, they strengthen their position considerably. Then this was never really about me at all. You were the spark. Theron met her eyes, but I provided the tinder. I've been alone too long, isolated, refusing to participate in house politics. They see me as a relic, an obstacle. Eventually, someone was going to force the issue. Dawn approached. Alina could see it in the way the darkness outside began to soften, gray creeping into black. Theron's movements had grown slightly slower, his features tightening with what might have been pain. You need to rest, she said. I need to finish explaining, Theron. She reached out, touched his hand before thinking better of it. His skin was cold but not unpleasant, like marble that had been in shadow. You're weakening, I can see it. He looked down at where her hand rested on his, expression unreadable. The sun affects us differently. For me, it's exhaustion rather than agony. But yes, I should. He trailed off, still staring at their joined hands. You're not afraid to touch me. Should I be? Most mortals are. Once they know what we are, they see corpses animated by dark magic. His thumb moved slightly, the barest caress against her palm. They're not entirely wrong. You're not a corpse. Alina kept her hand where it was. You're a person who's survived impossible things and chosen to keep surviving with honor. That's not nothing. Something shifted in Theron's expression, surprise giving way to something deeper, more vulnerable. You see me very charitably. I see you clearly. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken tension. Then Theron gently withdrew his hand and stood. I need to rest before the sun fully rises. The house is warded. You're safe here, but don't leave the grounds. He moved toward the library door, then paused. Elena, Jace, thank you for staying, for learning, for he seemed to struggle with words, for not seeing a monster when you look at me. Then he was gone, moving up the stairs with the last of his nocturnal strength. Alina remained in the library as dawn broke fully, exhaustion finally catching up with her, but sleep felt impossible. Her mind churned through everything she'd learned, every detail about the impossible world she'd stumbled into. She thought about Marcus Sashford and the world she'd ordered, governed by laws that supposedly protected the innocent, a world that had destroyed her anyway when power decided truth didn't matter. And she thought about Theron, ancient and alone, maintaining honor in a society built on predation, a monster by definition who'd shown her more kindness than any civilized man had. The distinction between human and vampire, she was beginning to understand, had little to do with heartbeat and breathing. She must have dozed, because she woke to find afternoon light streaming through the windows. Someone, Theron, presumably had covered her with a blanket. On the table beside her chair sat a tray with bread, cheese, and a note in elegant handwriting. You fell asleep studying vampire law. I'm oddly proud. There's food, and books if you want them. I'll wake at sunset. Tilena smiled, despite everything. The note was so perfectly dry humor, covering genuine care. She ate, then explored the books Theron had pulled from the shelves. Most were in languages she didn't read, but one was a journal. Its pages filled with the same elegant handwriting from the note. She shouldn't have read it. It was clearly private. She read it anyway. The entries spanned decades, occasional observations rather than daily records. Theron wrote about loneliness in clinical terms, as if it were a weather pattern he was tracking. He documented his sister's aging, his own unchanging face, the growing distance between mortal life and his existence. One entry stopped. Alina Cold, August 1851. Catherine is gone. I thought I had prepared myself for this inevitability, but preparation proves meaningless against grief. I am now truly alone, the last remnant of a human life I can barely remember living. Perhaps I should have let the battlefield claim me. At least then I would have died human, surrounded by fellows who understood mortality's value. Instead, I am immortal, isolated, and increasingly uncertain why I continue choosing to exist at all. Elena closed the journal carefully, her throat tight. She'd seen Theron as powerful, controlled, ancient. She hadn't fully understood how much of that control was simply survival. one foot in front of the other through centuries of accumulated loss. When sunset came and she heard movement upstairs, Alina had made a decision. Theron appeared in the library doorway, looking restored by daylight sleep. "You're awake. Good, we should continue." "I read your journal," Alina interrupted. "The one on the table. I know I shouldn't have, but I did." Theron went very still. "I see, you asked me earlier what I wanted. I said I wanted to not be afraid, to build something no one could take away." She stood, meeting his silver eyes. "I think you want the same thing, and I think we might be able to help each other." "Alina, let me finish. House Corvin is coming in 2 days. You said formal challenge is dangerous but possible. So let's prepare for that, together." She moved closer. "Teach me everything, not just vampire lore but how to fight them, how to survive. Use me as a reason to engage with your world again, instead of just existing in it." "Why would you risk this?" "Because you risked yourself from me," Alina said simply. "And because I'm tired of running from threats, I want to face them, with you." Theron stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled, not the careful, controlled expression she'd seen before, but something genuine and almost hopeful. "Very well," he said. "Then let's prepare for war." Chapter 7. The siege. The attack came on the second night, hours before the deadline. Alina was in the conservatory when she heard the first impact, something heavy, slamming against the manor's eastern wall. The protective wards flared, visible for an instant, blue-white light crackling across stone. She ran for the library where Theron had been working. He met her halfway, already moving with predatory speed. "They're testing the wards," he said, pulling her behind him. "Corvain brought more than 3 this time. I can hear at least 7 heartbeats surrounding the house. I thought you said the wards would keep them out." "They will, but wards can be broken if enough force is applied." Another impact shook the walls. Glass shattered somewhere upstairs. "They're trying to weaken the barriers before the formal challenge. Margot never did fight fair." A voice called from outside, amplified somehow to echo through the manor. "Lord Theron, we've come to collect what's owed. Send out the mortal, and we'll leave your precious neutrality intact. Refuse, and we'll tear down your house stone by stone." Theron's jaw tightened. He moved to the main hall, and Alina followed despite his warning gesture. Through the tall windows, she could see figures circling the manor, vampires, moving through the darkness like sharks around prey. "You broke the terms," Theron called back. "The challenge was to be in 2 days, under night court observation." Margot materialized near the front gate, just beyond the ward line. The mistress reconsidered. "Why wait when the outcome is inevitable? Send her out, Theron. Or, we'll assume you've chosen death." "I've chosen to honor Gastret, and protect an innocent." If House Corvain has forgotten those principles, perhaps it's time the night court reminded them. Margot's laughter was cold. "The night court is 3 days' travel from here. We'll be finished long before they arrive." She raised her hand, and the other vampires moved closer. "Last chance, old one." Theron turned to Alina, his expression fierce. "Go to the cellar. There's a passage that leads beyond the property line. Follow it until you reach the road. Then, no." "Alina, this isn't." "I said no." She grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "You taught me the rules, remember? You're strongest at night, on your own territory, with purpose. They're trying to make you abandon all 3 by sending me away. Don't let them. If you stay, you could die. If I run, you definitely will. They'll rush you the moment I cross the ward line." Alina held his gaze. "We fight together or not at all." Another impact struck the house, stronger this time. The wards flickered and dimmed slightly. Theron cursed in a language Alina didn't recognize. "There's a weapons room," he said finally. "3rd floor, western corner. Iron blades. They won't kill vampires, but they'll slow them down. Get as many as you can, carry and meet me in the entrance hall." Alina ran. The weapons room was exactly as described, a small armory containing swords, daggers, even a few pistols that looked a century old. She grabbed what she could carry, the weight unfamiliar and terrifying, then raced back downstairs. Theron had changed, not physically, but something in his demeanor had shifted. The controlled, gentle scholar was gone. What remained was the soldier he'd been at 23, the survivor who'd lived 2.5 centuries through sheer will and violence. "They're focusing their assault on the eastern ward," he said, taking one of the blades and testing its balance. "It's the oldest, most vulnerable. When it falls, and it will fall, they'll pour through that entrance. I need you behind the staircase, out of direct sight. Let them think you've fled. And then you do exactly what you did in the forest. You be brave and unexpected and human in ways they won't anticipate. His hand found her face, gentle despite the urgency. Can you do that? Alina nodded, not trusting her voice. The eastern ward shattered with a sound like a thunderclap. 7 vampires poured through the opening. Margot, leading, flanked by the others Alina had seen in the forest and for she didn't recognize, they moved with terrible synchronization, spreading through the entrance hall with predatory efficiency. Theron met them in the center of the room. What followed was violence, too fast for Alina to fully comprehend. Theron moved like water and lightning combined, his blade finding throats and hearts with surgical precision. But there were 7 of them, and only one of him, and even his ancient strength had limits. One vampire broke past him, heading for the stairs where Alina hid. She acted on instinct, swinging her blade low, as Theron had taught her during their practice sessions. The iron caught the vampire across the legs, not killing but sending him crashing into the banister. It bought Theron half a second. He used it to drive his blade through another attacker's heart. The fight continued, brutal and chaotic. Alina lost track of individual moments. There was only movement, the clash of metal, Theron's controlled fury, keeping them alive through sheer skill. Then, Margot broke through his defense. Her claws caught his shoulder, tearing through cloth and flesh. Theron staggered, and in that instant 3 more vampires were on him, bearing him down through combined weight. No, Alina didn't think, just moved. She ran forward with her blade extended, aiming for the vampire on Theron's back. The iron sank into flesh between shoulder blades. The vampire shrieked and twisted away, giving Theron room to throw off the others. He surged upward, and Alina saw his face clearly for the first time since the fighting started. His eyes had gone silver bright, entirely inhuman. Blood, both his and others, stained his shirt. When he smiled at the remaining vampires, his teeth were sharp and terrible. You wanted to test me, he said, voice gone cold and ancient. Let me remind you why even houses fear the truly old. What happened next was less fight than execution. Theron moved through the remaining vampires with lethal grace, centuries of experience translating into perfect, economical violence. When it ended, the vampires lay dead or dying on his entrance. Hall floor. Margot and 2 others had fled. Theron stood in the center of the carnage, breathing hard despite not needing breath, just habit, just the memory of humanity reasserting itself. Alina, he said without turning, are you hurt? No, I'll heal. He finally looked at her, his eyes fading back to silver gray. You saved my life. That vampire would have severed my spine if you hadn't intervened. We're even, then. A ghost of a smile touched his bloodstained face. Not quite, but we're getting there. Outside, dawn was still hours away. Somewhere in the forest, Margot was regrouping, planning her next move. But for now, they'd survived, together. Chapter 8, The Aftermath. They burned the bodies in the manor's courtyard, as tradition demanded. Alina watched the flames climb into the night sky, orange and gold against darkness, while Theron spoke words in a language that sounded like Latin but older, harsher. A funeral rite, he'd explained, required even for enemies. Vampire law demanded respect for the dead, regardless of how they'd died. It prevents vendettas from becoming eternal, Theron said when the flames finally died down. If we honor their deaths, their houses cannot claim we acted without dignity. Will House Corvin see it that way? No, but the Night Court will, when this inevitably reaches them. He looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical injury. The wounds on his shoulder had already closed, vampire healing working its impossible magic. We killed 4 of their members, in self-defense, on warded ground. By law, we're justified, but law and politics are different animals. They retreated to the library as false dawn began to gray the eastern sky. Alina collapsed into a chair while Theron methodically cleaned his blade, his movements mechanical, distant. You fought in wars, Alina said quietly. It wasn't a question. Several, the revolution, as I mentioned, then the War of 1812, various conflicts in Europe through the 19th century. He set the cleaned blade aside. Fighting is easy when you're immortal. You learn patterns, perfect techniques, stop thinking of opponents as people, and see them as problems to solve. Is that what you did tonight? I tried to. His hands stilled, but when that vampire had me down, and you charged in with a blade you barely know how to use, putting yourself between me and death, He looked up at her, expression raw. That wasn't a problem to solve. That was someone I care about risking everything for my survival. It's been a very long time since anyone did that. The confession hung between them, weighted with more than words. I didn't think, Alina admitted. I just saw you in danger and moved. Exactly. You responded with instinct, not calculation. That's what made it remarkable. Theron stood, moving to the window to watch the approaching dawn. And terrifying. You could have died, Alina. One wrong move and they would have torn you apart before I could stop them. But they didn't. We won. We survived. That's not the same as winning. He turned back to face her. Margot escaped with 2 others. She report back to Mistress Corvain, who will escalate this to the Night Court. Within a week, this manor will be filled with vampire lords demanding explanations, passing judgments, deciding our fates based on centuries of political considerations we can't control. Alina heard the fear beneath his controlled tone, not of death, but of losing the fragile peace he'd built through isolation. Then we prepare for that too, she said. You know their laws, their protocols. We'll make our case. It's not that simple. The Night Court operates on precedent and power. I'm unhoused, which means I have no political backing, no house to defend me. He sat down across from her, suddenly looking ancient despite his youthful features. And you're mortal, to most of the court, you're livestock at best, property at worst. They won't see protecting you as honorable, they'll see it as weakness. What if I wasn't mortal? The question escaped before Alina could reconsider it. Theron went very still. You told me you could turn me, Alina continued, speaking quickly before courage failed. Make me vampire. That would solve the political problem, wouldn't it? I'd be your progeny, under your protection by blood right. House Corvain couldn't touch me without declaring war on you directly. Alina, no. Theron's voice was sharp. I offered that option before you understood what it meant. Vampirism isn't a solution, it's a curse dressed as immortality. You'd watch everyone you love age and die. You'd outlive civilizations. See the world change until nothing familiar remains. The hunger never stops, the isolation never ends, and death becomes impossible even when you desperately want it. You've survived it. Survived, not thrived, not found joy or peace or any of the things that make existence worthwhile. He leaned forward, intense. You have a life ahead of you, Alina. A human life with all its brief, brilliant intensity. I won't steal that from you because vampire politics make mortality inconvenient, even if it costs you the court's favor. Especially then. His expression softened. I've lost too much to immortality already. I won't add your humanity to that list. Alina wanted to argue, but the conviction in his voice stopped her. This mattered to him in ways she was only beginning to understand. Then what do we do? She asked. We wait for the Night Court. We present our case honestly and hope that enough of the old laws still mean something. Theron's smile was tired. And if they rule against us, we have one advantage. I'm old enough and strong enough that enforcement would cost them dearly. They might decide exile is preferable to war. Exile where, away from the houses, perhaps the New World America has fewer established vampire territories, or the far north, where populations are sparse and politics matter less. He met her eyes. I wouldn't expect you to follow, of course. This is my burden, not yours. Stop that. Elena's voice came out sharper than intended. Stop trying to push me away for my own good. I chose to stay. I chose to fight beside you. Those were my decisions, Theron, and you don't get to unmake them because you've decided I don't understand the consequences. You deserve better than this. Maybe, but I also deserve the right to choose my own path, even if it's difficult. She stood, moving around the table to face him directly. You've spent 2 centuries alone because you think protecting people means keeping them distant. But that's not protection. It's just a different kind of death. Slower, maybe, but just as final. Theron looked up at her, something breaking behind his carefully maintained control. I don't know how to do this, he admitted quietly. How to let someone close without destroying them. Everyone I've cared about has aged away, or died, or left because proximity to me brought nothing but pain. Then learn with me. Alina reached out, taking his cold hand in her warm one. We'll figure it out together. Badly, probably, with mistakes and arguments and moments we both want to take back, but together. For a long moment, Theron simply held her hand, staring at their joined fingers as if trying to memorize the sight. You're either remarkably brave or completely mad, he finally said. Probably both. This time, when he smiled, It reached his eyes, genuine warmth, breaking through centuries of careful distance. Outside, true dawn arrived, and Theron's strength began to fade. But he didn't let go of Elena's hand until exhaustion finally pulled him toward Daisley. "Stay," he murmured as he rose. "Please, when I wake, stay." "I will," Elena promised, and meant it. Chapter 9. The interlude. 3 days passed in suspended quiet. No further attacks came, no messengers from House Corvain, just silence stretching across the Vale with like held breath before a storm. Elena used the time to learn. Theron taught her vampire history during the long night stories of the 7 houses' founding, the wars that had shaped their territories, the blood oaths that bound their society together. He showed her how to identify different vampire lineages by subtle differences in movement and speech. He even taught her basic self-defense, though he maintained she'd never match vampire speed. "The goal isn't to win," he explained during one practice session in the manor's empty ballroom. "It's to survive long enough for help to arrive or an opening to appear. Stay moving, stay unpredictable, and never let them corner you." Elena practiced the movements he showed her, defensive stances, evasive rolls, how to use an opponent's momentum against them. Her muscles ached in ways they never had from teaching, but she pushed through the discomfort. "Good," Theron said, as she successfully dodged his carefully controlled lunge. "You're thinking like prey that fights back, rather than prey that freezes. That's the difference between death and survival." But the training sessions were only part of how they spent their time. In the quieter moments, they talked, really talked, in ways Elena suspected Theron hadn't done in decades. She told him about her childhood in Yorkshire, the governess position that had been her escape from a suffocating small town, her dreams of eventually running her own school. She described the careful respectability she'd built, the years of perfect behavior, and how quickly it had all crumbled when Pava decided truth didn't matter. "I thought if I just followed the rules, worked hard, stayed modest and proper, I'd be safe," she said one evening, as they sat in the library. "That goodness would protect me, but it doesn't, does it? Not when someone with more power decides you're inconvenient." "No," Theron agreed quietly. "Human society is remarkably efficient at destroying women who inconvenience powerful men. Vampire society is more honest about its brutality, but no less cruel." He was silent for a moment. "Did you love him, Marcus Sashford?" "God, no. He repulsed me, but I was polite because politeness was required, gentle in my refusal because women must always soften rejection to protect male ego." Elena's hands tightened on her teacup, and somehow my politeness became encouragement in his mind. My gentleness became proof of hidden desire. When I finally told him explicitly to stop, he was so outraged that I'd led him on that destroying my reputation felt justified to him. "I could still kill him for you." Elena looked up, startled by the casual offer. Theron met her gaze steadily, no humor in his expression. "I'm serious," he continued. "One night's travel. I find him, ensure he faces consequences for his actions. Return by dawn. The satisfaction wouldn't undo the damage, but it might provide closure. You'd do that, risk yourself for revenge on my behalf. I'd do considerably more than that for you at this point." The admission came out matter-of-fact, but Elena heard the weight behind it. "Though I'm beginning to suspect revenge is the wrong word. Justice, perhaps, restoration of balance." Elena considered the offer, truly considered it, imagining Marcus's terror as an ancient vampire appeared in his bedroom. Part of her thrilled at the thought, the darker part that had emerged since entering the Vale would. "No," she said finally, "he's not worth the risk to you, and killing him wouldn't give me what I actually want. Which is, to build something he can never touch, to prove that his attempt to destroy me failed." She met Theron's silver eyes. "To find a life where his opinion of me matters exactly as much as it should." "Not at all." Theron was quiet for a long moment. "Then, you're remarkable. You know that. Most people would choose revenge. You choose transcendence." "I'm not transcendent. I'm just tired of letting cruel men dictate my worth." "That," Theron said softly, "is what makes you remarkable." The nights fell into a rhythm, training, talking, comfortable silences, broken by observations that grew increasingly personal. Elena learned that Theron loved music but hadn't played the pianoforte in his music room for 60 years, that he missed the taste of food more than he'd expected, that he'd once had a dog named Wellington, who'd lived to 16 and whose death had devastated him more than most human losses. "Animals don't care about immortality," he explained. Wellington loved me exactly the same whether I was vampire or human. He got old and I didn't, but it never changed how he greeted me each evening or demanded walks through the forest. His death was uncomplicated by politics or fear, or any of the things that make human relationships with vampires so fraught. Is that why you've stayed alone? Because Uncomplicated died with Wellington. Partly, though if I'm honest, I was already isolating myself before he died. Watching Catherine age had convinced me that caring about mortals only led to grief. He looked at Alina with something like wonder. You've rather thoroughly disrupted that philosophy. Good, Alina said. It was a terrible philosophy. On the fourth night, Alina woke from an afternoon nap to find Theron sitting in the chair beside her bed, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. How long have you been here? She asked, still groggy. An hour, perhaps. You were dreaming, talking in your sleep about teaching children to read. His voice was gentle. You smiled. It was the first time I've seen you look entirely at peace. Alina sat up, suddenly saw. That's rather creepy, watching someone sleep. Probably, but I'm vampire. We excel at unsettling behavior. He didn't move from the chair. You should know that the night court messengers arrived an hour ago. They're waiting downstairs. The court convenes tomorrow night to hear our case. Elena's peaceful drowsiness evaporated. Tomorrow. I bought us one night to prepare. They wanted to start immediately, but I invoked Hostrite and insisted on proper proceedings. He finally stood, offering his hand to help her up, which means we have approximately 20 hours to prepare our defense before the most powerful vampires in 7 territories decide whether we live or die. Alina took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. His skin was cold as always, but the touch felt grounding rather than unsettling. Then we'd better make them count, she said. Theron's smile was slight but genuine. That's my remarkably brave, possibly mad mortal. Partner, Alina corrected. That's your partner. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, hope, and something deeper that made Elena's breath catch. Yes, Theron said quietly, my partner, and for the first time since entering the Valewood, Alina felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Chapter 10. The Choice. The Night Court. Assembled in Theron's ballroom, like a gathering of beautiful predators, 12 vampires sat in a semicircle, representing the 7 major houses and 5 independent observers. Each was ancient. Alina could tell by the way they held themselves, the weight of centuries in their stillness. They wore clothing from different eras, medieval velvets beside Victorian suits, beside modern evening wear, as if time itself were attending. That at the center sat a woman who looked no older than 30 but whose eyes suggested millennia. Lady Mordain, Theron had explained, was the court's eldest member, and its presiding judge. Alina stood beside Theron before them, acutely aware of her mortality. Her heartbeat seemed thunderous in the silent room. Every vampire present could hear it, smell her blood, sense her fear beneath the courage she was desperately maintaining. Lord Theron, Lady Mordain began, her voice like aged wine. You stand accused by House Corvain of murdering 4 of their members, violating territorial agreements, and harboring a mortal witness in defiance of house law. How do you answer? I acted in self-defense on warded ground, Theron replied, his voice steady. House Corvain violated guest right by attacking my home before the agreed challenge date. By ancient law, I was justified in defending both my territory and my guest, a mortal guest who witnessed vampire activity and lives to speak of it. This came from a male vampire wearing armor that looked medieval. You know the law, Theron. Mortal witnesses must be silenced or turned. Exceptions aren't permitted. The law also protects Gestrit and neutral territory, Theron countered. Miss Blackwood sought shelter in the Valewood, which I maintained as neutral ground. I offered protection, as is my right. House Corvain had no authority to hunt her on my land, yet she remains mortal. Another voice observed a woman in an elaborate gown, suggesting you don't intend to turn her, which means she eventually leave your protection. And then what? She carries knowledge of our existence, our nature, our politics. One conversation in the wrong tavern, and centuries of secrecy unraveled. Alina felt 12 pairs of inhuman eyes shift to her. The weight of their attention was crushing. Miss Blackwood, Lady Mordain said, you understand what you've witnessed, what we are. Yes, my lady. Alina forced herself to meet that ancient gaze. I understand completely. And you understand that we cannot simply allow you to leave with this knowledge. I understand you believe I'm a threat. Elena's voice strengthened, but I respectfully disagree. I have no interest in exposing vampire existence. Where would I go? Who would believe me? I'd be dismissed as mad or hysterical, a disgraced governess spouting impossible stories. I have nothing to gain from speaking, and everything to lose. You assume rational behavior, the armored vampire said, but humans are emotional creatures. Anger, revenge, tyranny, of these could prompt you to speak despite consequences. Then you don't know Miss Blackwood very well, Theron interjected. She's proven herself remarkably rational under impossible circumstances. She didn't flee in terror when confronted with our existence. She didn't beg for her life during House Corvain's attack. She fought beside me, saved my life, and has spent the last week learning our laws with more dedication than some vampires show. Touching, the woman in the gown said dryly, but ultimately irrelevant. The law exists for a reason. Theron, we cannot make exceptions based on sentiment. I'm not asking for sentiment, Theron replied. I'm asking for justice. House Corvain used Miss Blackwood as an excuse to attack my neutrality. They violated protocols, broke guest right, and attempted murder on warded ground. Those crimes are substantial. Yet you're focusing on the mortal witness while ignoring the house that created this situation. Silence fell. The court members exchanged glances, some kind of wordless communication passing between them. Lady Mordain leaned forward slightly. You make valid points, Lord Theron. House Corvain's behavior was aggressive. However, that doesn't resolve the central issue. What becomes of Miss Blackwood? She remains under my protection, Theron said firmly. For how long? A year, a decade, a human lifetime. The ancient woman's gaze was piercing. Eventually she'll die, Theron. And in the decades before that death, she age, weaken, become vulnerable to other houses who might see her as leverage against you. Protecting a mortal indefinitely is impractical. Unless she becomes immortal, someone suggested. The words hung in the air like a blade. No, Theron said immediately. That's not, actually, Elena interrupted, her heart pounding. I'd like to speak to that option. Theron turned to stare at her. Elena, we discussed this, you discussed it. I listened. She faced the court, forcing confidence into her voice. Lord Theron has refused to turn me because he believes vampirism is a curse. He wants to protect my humanity, my mortality, my chance at a normal life. And I understand his reasoning, but I'd like the court to understand mine. Lady Mordain gestured for her to continue. I had a normal life, Elena said. I was respectable, educated, employed in a good household. I followed every rule, met every expectation, and it protected me exactly not at all. One powerful man's wounded pride destroyed everything I'd built in a single day. The human world offered me no justice, no recourse, no safety. She took a breath, steadying herself. Then I entered the Valewood and met Lord Theron, a vampire who's shown me more honor, respect, and genuine care than most humans ever did. He's taught me that immortality isn't the real curse, it's powerlessness, being subject to others' whims with no ability to protect yourself or those you care about. You want power, the armored vampire observed. I want agency, Elena corrected. I want to choose my own path instead of having it dictated by men who see me as property or prey or problem to solve. And yes, I want immortality not because I fear death, but because I've finally found something worth living for. She turned to Theron, saw the conflict in his silver eyes. You've spent 2 centuries protecting people by keeping them distant, she said softly. But I don't need distance. I need partnership, equality, the ability to stand beside you rather than behind you. Her voice dropped lower. Turn me, not because the court demands it or because vampire law requires it, but because I'm choosing it, because I choose you. The ballroom was utterly silent. Theron stared at her, centuries of loneliness warring with hope in his expression. You don't know what you're asking. I know exactly what I'm asking, and I'm asking anyway. Elena, I love you, she said, the words escaping before caution could stop them. I think I started loving you the moment you stepped between me and House Corvain, when you could have walked away but chose protection instead. I love your honor, your loneliness, your terrible jokes about stealing Silva. I love that you've survived centuries of loss and still choose kindness, and I want forever to love you properly. Something broke in Theron's expression, the last wall crumbling. The court recognizes a choice freely made, Lady Mordain said, and Elena heard approval in her ancient voice. Lord Theron, you may turn Miss Blackwood with our blessing. The matter is resolved. Theron didn't seem to hear her. He was staring at Elena as if seeing her for the first time. Are you certain? He whispered. Completely. It will hurt. The transformation is, I don't care. You'll outlive everything you know, everyone from your human life. I already have. Alina said gently. That life ended the day Marcus Sashford destroyed my reputation. This is my second beginning. Let me choose how it starts. Theron reached for her hand, his cold fingers trembling slightly against her warm ones. Then, yes, he said, voice rough with emotion. Yes, I'll teach you everything. I'll stand beside you through eternity, or until you decide you've had enough of my company. A slight, wondering smile crossed his face. And I'll love you for however long you'll have me. Forever sounds good, Alina said. Forever it is. The court dissolved around them, vampires departing like shadows at dawn, but Alina barely noticed. She was looking at Theron, at the hope finally blazing in his silver eyes, at the future opening before them like wings. 3 weeks later, after the transformation completed and Alina woke to her first night as vampire, Theron took her into the Vale, wood under stars that seemed brighter than they'd ever been. Her new senses were overwhelming, every sound crisp, every scent distinct, the world alive with details she'd never noticed. How do you feel? Theron asked. Alina turned to him, seeing him clearly for the first time with vampire sight. He was radiant in the darkness, beautiful and hers. Like I've finally come home, she said. And meant it.